Lonely Millionaire was sad until a little girl invited her to sit at the table, then her dad. Just before we start, this community spans every continent. Drop your city's name if you feel comfortable sharing. The restaurant on Maple Street was the kind of place Victoria Harmon never visited twice. Small tables with mismatched chairs, paper napkins folded into triangles, a handwritten chalkboard menu above a counter that smelled of garlic bread and something sweet baking in the back. She had walked past it 100 times on her way to the glass tower, where she ran a company worth $400 million. Tonight, for reasons she could not fully explain, she had pushed open the door. Maybe it was the rain. Maybe it was the look on her assistant's face when she said, once again, that she didn't need anyone to walk her to her car. Maybe it was the silence in her penthouse that had started to feel less like peace and more like punishment. Whatever it was, Victoria sat down at a table near the window, set her phone face down beside the salt shaker, and told herself she would eat one meal like a normal human being. She was 30 years old. She had been on the cover of Chicago Business Magazine twice. She had spoken at Davos. She had a closet full of clothes and a kitchen designed by a professional chef that she used, almost exclusively to make coffee. She had all of this, and on a rainy Thursday in October she was sitting alone in a neighborhood diner eating soup because the alternative was going home to 42 floors of quiet. She ordered the soup. She opened the menu and ordered it anyway. She was halfway through it when she heard the voice. "You look lonely." Victoria looked up slowly, the way you do when you're not sure the sound was real. Standing beside her table was a little girl, 6 years old maybe, with 2 dark braids tied with yellow ribbons and a gap where her front tooth used to be. She wore a purple sweater with a cartoon owl on it. And she was holding a crayon in one hand and looking at Victoria with the kind of direct, unfiltered honesty that only very young children and very old people ever manage. "Excuse me," Victoria said. "You're eating alone," the girl said, as if this explained everything. "We have an extra chair. You can sit with us if you want." She pointed across the room to a table near the back, where a man sat with his head slightly bowed over a menu, his shoulders carrying the quiet weight of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. A glass of water sat in front of him, untouched. He had placed his jacket on the back of his chair with the careful deliberateness of someone who does not own many jackets. Before Victoria could answer, the man looked up. He wasn't what she expected. He was around 35, with dark hair that needed a cut and the kind of hands that told you exactly what kind of life a person lived. Calloused, steady, clean despite everything. He wore a flannel shirt that had been ironed, which for some reason was the detail that hit her hardest. He had ironed a flannel shirt to take his daughter to a neighborhood diner. There was something about that, some quiet, stubborn dignity in it, that she couldn't dismiss. His expression when he saw his daughter standing at a stranger's table was a precise mixture of horror and exhaustion. "Lily." His voice was low, controlled. He was already standing, already moving toward them with the careful urgency of a man who has spent years cleaning up small catastrophes. "Lily, come here, right now." He reached the table and placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder, his eyes meeting Victoria's with an apology so sincere it was almost physical. "I'm so sorry she does this. She sees someone alone and she—" He stopped, pressed his lips together, started again. "Please forgive us." Victoria looked at him, then at Lily, then back at him. "There's nothing to forgive," she said. He blinked. He had prepared for irritation, for the polite version of "go away." He had not, apparently, prepared for this. "She's right," Victoria added, nodding toward Lily. "I am eating alone." She paused, and she would later be unable to explain what made her say the next words, except that they were simply true. "I wouldn't mind the company." His name was Daniel Reeves. He told her this reluctantly, the way people give their name when they're not sure they deserve to be remembered. He was a carpenter, custom furniture mostly, the kind that took weeks and required patience most people didn't have. He'd had a small workshop in Evanston for 3 years. Business was slow but steady. He worked alone, mostly, which he said without complaint as a fact. Lily was 6 3/4, she informed Victoria herself. holding up the relevant number of fingers with a solemnity that suggested this fraction was important. Her mother had died 2 years ago. She said this the way children sometimes say hard things, simply, without performance, because no one had taught her yet that the world expected grief to be kept small and private. Victoria didn't say she was sorry. She had heard enough empty sorries in her life to know when one would land hollow. Instead, she said, "What was her name?" Daniel looked at her. Something shifted slightly in his expression, like a door opening one cautious inch. "Margaret," he said very quietly. "We called her Maggie." Victoria nodded. She picked up her spoon. They ate dinner together. It was not a dramatic evening by any measure. Lily drew a picture on a paper napkin, a house with 3 figures in front of it, one wearing what appeared to be a crown, and explained at length that the crown was not a real crown but a headband that belonged to someone important. Victoria accepted this without question. Daniel ate his pasta slowly and answered every question his daughter asked him and did not look at his phone once. Victoria noticed this. She was in meetings all day with people who checked their phones every 4 minutes and called it multitasking. She had stopped noticing it until she was sitting across from someone who simply didn't do it. She noticed, too, the way he watched Lily, not anxiously, not with the performative attention of someone who wanted to be seen being a good father, but with a quiet, steady focus, as if she were the most important thing in any room he had ever entered. At one point, Lily asked him something complicated about whether clouds had feelings, and he considered it seriously for a full 10 seconds before answering, not with a dismissal, not with a redirect, with an actual answer thought through, offered gently. Victoria had attended a parenting symposium the previous year as a donor. She had heard a great deal about intentional presence. She had never seen it done as naturally as this. At the end of the meal, when the check came, he reached for it before she could. "Please," he said, "you shared your evening with us." Victoria wanted to argue. She was, after all, a woman who did not let people pay for things. She had once, at a charity dinner, politely but firmly taken the bill from a senator. But something in Daniel's tone on that same unhurried dignity stopped her. He wasn't performing generosity. He was simply doing what he thought was right, with no interest in whether she was impressed by it. "All right," she said. Lily hugged her before they left, just walked around the table and wrapped her small arms around Victoria's waist without asking, the way children do when they have decided, with complete finality, that a person is safe. Victoria sat very still and felt something move in her chest that she didn't have a name for yet. It was not quite joy, and not quite grief, and not quite longing, although it borrowed something from all 3. "Goodbye," Lily said, pulling back and looking up with those eyes that held nothing back. "You should come back next Friday. We come every Friday." Daniel looked mortified. "Lily, you can't just—" "It's fine," Victoria said. She looked at the little girl, then carefully at the father, at the ironed shirt and the calloused hands, and the expression of a man who was deeply tired and deeply committed and somehow, against all evidence, still both. "Maybe I will." She walked home in the rain and didn't open her umbrella once. The wet wasn't unpleasant. It felt, in a strange way, like something being washed clean. She did not go back the next Friday. She told herself she was busy. She had a merger call. She had a dinner with investors in from New York. She had a life that did not include weekly visits to a Maple Street diner with a carpenter and his daughter. She went back the Friday after that. She did not examine why. Some things she had learned were better understood later than resisted now. 3 weeks passed before Victoria allowed herself to admit she was looking forward to Fridays. It was not the kind of admission she made lightly. Victoria Harmon had built her life on a very specific principle: do not need things you cannot control. She had learned this at 17, sitting in the office of a boarding school financial advisor who told her that her parents' accounts had been emptied, and her scholarship was conditional on her maintaining a grade point average she had been managing on 4 hours of sleep. She had learned it again at 24, when the man she thought she would marry introduced her to his other girlfriend at a company party, casually, as though it were simply a piece of information she would eventually need. She had learned it, perhaps most thoroughly, at 28, when she took a company from 3 employees to 318 months and discovered that the faster you rose, the fewer people bothered to ask how you were doing. They assumed you were doing fine. The title confirmed it. She was doing fine, she always said. She was doing fine. The third Friday she returned to the Maple Street diner, Lily greeted her at the door. She had apparently been watching for Victoria through the window, because she was pressed against the glass with her hands cupped around her eyes when Victoria came around the corner, and she broke into a run the moment she spotted her, crashing through the door with the kind of joy that is completely unself-conscious and therefore completely devastating to people who have spent years making sure their own joy is always managed and measured. "You came back," Lily said, grabbing Victoria's hand with both of hers. "Daddy said maybe you were too busy. I said no." Victoria looked over the girl's head at Daniel, who was standing by their table with his jacket half off and an expression she was beginning to recognize, that particular mix of helpless affection and quiet apology that seemed to be his most natural resting state. "She's been talking about this since Tuesday," he said. "I brought you something," Lily announced. She produced from her coat pocket a folded piece of construction paper, slightly crumpled from where it had been residing, and held it out with both hands and a solemnity appropriate to a formal document. Victoria took it and unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing in crayon. 2 figures stood together in front of something that might have been a table or a building. It was genuinely unclear. And above them Lily had written, in careful, uneven capital letters, pressing hard enough that the crayon had left ridges in the paper, "My friend Victoria." Victoria stared at it for a moment longer than she intended. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steady. She was good at steady. "I spelled your name wrong," Lily said. "Daddy told me how, but I forgot the middle part." "You got the important parts," Victoria said. Lily considered this seriously and apparently found it satisfactory, because she climbed into her chair and picked up the menu even though she ordered the same thing every Friday. They ordered. Daniel asked Victoria how her week had been, and she answered more honestly than she planned. Something about a board meeting that had run 4 hours and ended with someone suggesting they bring in a co-CEO to handle the creative side of the business. Which was not a suggestion. It was an accusation dressed in collaborative language. And she had handled it with precisely the cool authority required. And then by the time she finished, she realized she had told him more than she'd told anyone in months. He listened the way he did everything, without interruption, without the half-distracted politeness of someone composing their response while you were still talking. "Do you like the work?" he asked, when she finished. The question surprised her. People asked how the work was going, how big the company was, whether she was planning to expand into new markets, whether she'd considered going public. No one asked if she liked it. "Most days," she said. "Some days I like the idea of it more than the reality." He nodded. "Yeah. Same with furniture." A pause, measured and comfortable. "I love making it. Some days I hate the business side. Finding clients, negotiating, explaining to people why quality costs what it costs." He turned his water glass slightly on the table. "But then someone sends a photo of their kids doing homework on a table I made, and I remember what it's actually for." "What do you make?" she asked. He pulled out his phone, the first time she'd seen him use it, and turned it toward her. The screen showed a dining table. Walnut, she thought, with hand-carved legs that curved at the base like roots pressing into earth. The surface had been finished to a warm, deep glow. It was extraordinary, not in a showroom way. In a "this was made by someone who understood wood and time" way. "You made that?" she said. "Last spring, took 8 weeks. Where is it now?" "Family in Wilmette. 2 kids, a dog, and apparently a grandmother who visits every Sunday." He smiled, small and private. "They sent me a photo of the whole family around it at Thanksgiving. 3 generations." He looked at the photo a moment longer, went, "That was a good day." Lily, who had been quietly coloring on another paper napkin and apparently absorbing the entire conversation, looked up with the timing of someone who had been waiting for the right entrance. "Daddy made my bed too," she said. "It has stars on it." "Stars?" Victoria looked at Daniel. "I carved them into the headboard," he said with a faint note of embarrassment, as if making something beautiful for your child were a weakness someone might exploit. She asked for stars. I asked for real stars first, Lily clarified. He said those were a different kind of hard, so I said the carved kind would be okay. Victoria looked at this man who had carved stars into a headboard because his daughter asked, and real ones were unavailable. She thought about that for a long moment while the sounds of the diner went on around them. She thought about it for most of the following week. On Tuesday, she found herself walking past a furniture gallery on Michigan Avenue, stopped in front of the window display, and noticed for the first time that none of the pieces had what Daniel's table had. They were smooth and expensive and impersonal, made to look valuable rather than to be used. Nothing like root-curved legs and 8 weeks of patience. Nothing like something built by someone who understood what tables were actually for. Her assistant, Claire, found her in the hallway later that afternoon holding a walnut paint chip from a hardware store she couldn't explain being in. "Are you all right?" Claire asked. "I'm looking at wood tones," Victoria said. Claire accepted this without question, because she had worked for Victoria for 6 years and had developed an instinct for the difference between things worth asking about and things that would resolve themselves into sense eventually. The fourth Friday, Victoria arrived first. She sat at the table they had been sharing. She thought of it now without deciding to as their table, and she ordered a coffee and waited. She was not someone who waited for people. People waited for her. Assistants arrived early. Drivers sat outside. Restaurants held tables. Yet here she was, turned slightly toward the door, watching for a man in a flannel shirt and a little girl with yellow ribbons. They were 11 minutes late. Daniel came through the door carrying Lily on his back because, as he explained while setting her down with considerable care, she had fallen asleep on the bus and he hadn't wanted to wake her. "She weighs 42 pounds, he said, rolling his shoulders slightly. 43, Lily said, suddenly and completely awake, with the startling alertness of children who have been only pretending to sleep and have been biding their time for exactly the right moment. Victoria laughed. She couldn't help it. It came out before she decided to let it, clear and unguarded and real. Daniel looked at her when she laughed, and for just a moment his expression shifted into something she couldn't categorize, something careful and open at the same time, before he looked at the menu. "So," Lily said, climbing into her chair with full authority over the evening, "can we talk about the dog?" "We don't have a dog," Daniel said. "That's what I want to talk about," Lily said. The evening unfolded the way their evenings had started to unfold, easily, without agenda, with the strange natural comfort of a thing that has found its own shape. But as Victoria walked home later through the October air that had turned properly cold, she felt the first small tremor of something she recognized, from a great distance, as fear. Not of Daniel, not of Lily, of herself, of the growing and undeniable fact that these Friday evenings had become the part of the week she lived toward, the fixed point around which the other days arranged themselves, and she had no idea what to do with that. What Lily said at the end of the night stayed with her until she reached her building. As Daniel helped her with her coat, the little girl looked up at Victoria with the directness that was entirely and completely her own. "I told my teacher I have a new friend," Lily said. "She asked me what you do and I said you're important." Victoria crouched down to Lily's level, right there in the doorway of the diner. "What did your teacher say?" Lily considered this with appropriate gravity. "She said everybody's important." Victoria looked at her for a long moment. "Your teacher is right," she said softly. Walking home alone again, she thought, important is not the same as needed, and needed is not the same as loved. And she had been important for a very long time. She had the title and the office and the profile in Forbes to prove it. But standing at the window of her penthouse 20 minutes later, looking out at the city that had validated everything she'd worked for, she felt the thought like a small stone dropping into still water. Something was either beginning or breaking. She wasn't sure yet which one would take her further from where she'd been. It was Claire who first said something. She said it carefully, the way you approach a situation you're not sure about, with the words arranged to look like casual observation and nothing else. You've left the office by 7 every Friday for the past month. Victoria was reviewing a contract at her desk. I'm aware. You never leave before 9 on Fridays. You used to say Friday evenings were the most productive because everyone else has already emotionally checked out and you can think. People change. Claire set a folder on the corner of the desk. There's a gala Saturday. The Children's Research Foundation. Your name is already on the donor list, but they'd like a confirmed RSVP. Will you be bringing anyone? Victoria looked up from the contract. No, she said. A pause she hadn't planned. Confirm solo. Claire nodded and left without another word, which was one of her most valuable qualities. Victoria turned back to the contract, but the words stopped making complete sense for a moment. She set her pen down and looked out the window at the city spread below her in the early afternoon light. She had been to 47 galas in the last 3 years. She had attended them alone, or with her acquaintance Gregory, a harmless investment banker who understood their arrangement was aesthetic and nothing further. She had smiled and networked and written large checks and left early and gone home and poured exactly 2 fingers of whiskey and stood at her window and watched the lights. 47 times. She had never once thought, I wish someone were here with me. She was thinking it now. She picked up her pen. She had a company to run. The following Friday, something happened that changed the quiet arithmetic of everything. They were at the diner, Lily at the end of a story about her classmate Priya stealing the best green crayon from the communal box for 3 consecutive days. 3 days, Victoria. 3 full days, and she never once said sorry. When Lily knocked her apple juice in a clean arc directly into Daniel's lap. He moved fast, grabbing napkins from the dispenser, and in the process knocked the small paper bag he'd brought with him off the edge of the table. Victoria caught it before it hit the floor. She set it back on the table, but as she placed it down, the top folded open, and she saw what was inside. A worn sketchbook, soft at the spine, and a rolled set of drawing pencils held together with a rubber band that had been wound twice. Sorry, Daniel said, still blotting at the table. Can you just... Of course. She pushed the bag toward him. But she had seen enough in those seconds. A page had fallen open as the bag shifted, and she had seen what was on it before she looked away. It was not furniture. It was a portrait of Lily, asleep, rendered in pencil with a precision and a tenderness that belonged to a different category of talent altogether. Not the careful craft of a skilled maker of things, and something rarer. The kind of drawing that made you understand the person who had drawn it understood their subject the way you understand something you have studied in every available light. The shading alone, the way light fell across Lily's cheek, the loose curl of one hand beneath her chin, the faint suggestion of eyelashes resting against skin. Victoria said nothing. Neither did Daniel. But something had changed in the air between them, and she noticed him glance at the bag once, and then at her face, reading, carefully, quickly, whether she had seen it. She had not been trained to be indirect. You draw, she said. A beat of silence. Sometimes, he said. That was not sometimes. That was something you have been doing for a very long time. He looked at her. His expression was difficult to read in the way that faces are difficult to read when the person behind them is deciding how much to let be seen. Something between discomfort and the particular exhaustion of someone who has folded a part of themselves away and not opened it in years. I used to, he said. In school, I had a... He stopped, reorganized. I had a different plan once. What happened to it? The question sat between them. She hadn't softened it. She half expected him to answer the way most people did, with a shrug, a vague gesture, a change of subject that both parties pretend is an answer. He didn't. Life, he said. Then, after a pause that felt like something being decided, Maggie got sick during my last year at the Art Institute. She was diagnosed in October. We weren't married yet. I had 1 semester left in my MFA program. He folded a napkin precisely along its crease, smoothed it flat with 2 fingers. We needed stable money. Real money. I knew woodworking. I'd done it summers to pay tuition. I was good enough at it to make it work. He looked at the folded napkin. I don't want you to think I resented it. I need you to know that. I chose every step. Maggie never asked me to. She cried when I withdrew. But you still draw, Victoria said. I still draw, he said. Lily, who had been listening while exhibiting every external sign of not listening, head bent, crayon moving, looked up at precisely the right moment. Daddy draws me every night, she said. After I fall asleep. He thinks I don't know. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment with the specific weariness of a man betrayed by the person he loves most. I know because I'm not always all the way asleep, Lily added, with considerable and unapologetic satisfaction. The expression on Daniel's face, an exposed, fond, exhausted, accepting, made something bloom painfully in Victoria's chest. She asked, carefully, if she could see the sketchbook. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he opened the bag and placed the sketchbook on the table between them. And he did not say anything else. She understood this was a decision that had cost something. She turned the pages. 32 drawings, all of Lily, different ages, different moments, asleep in a hospital chair with her small fists curled, eating cereal with intense concentration, reading a picture book upside down by accident, laughing with her whole body at something off frame. There was a drawing of Lily at what looked like 3 or 4 years old, pressed against a hospital window with both palms flat on the glass, and Victoria looked at it for a long time without speaking. There was a drawing of Lily holding a single flower with the focused intensity of someone responsible for something precious and fragile. And then, near the back, 3 sketches she was not prepared for. They were of her. Victoria, sitting at the diner table, turned slightly toward the window, something in her posture suggesting a person who is used to waiting but has forgotten what for. Victoria mid-laugh, one hand near her mouth, caught in the precise moment before self-consciousness could arrive and shut it down. Victoria listening, her expression open in a way she did not often see on her own face, carrying something that looked almost like relief. The restaurant continued on around them. Someone at the counter ordered coffee. Lily hummed quietly to herself, coloring the sky orange because she was in that phase. A chair scraped. The bell above the door rang. She heard none of it. "Daniel," she said. Her voice was very quiet. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the table, jaw set, with the expression of a man who has stepped off something high and is suspended in the moment before knowing if there is ground below. "I should have asked," he said. "Don't," she said. He looked up. "Don't apologize," she said. "I mean it." Something passed between them in that moment. Wordless, uncategorizable, the kind of thing that arrives not with music or obvious lighting, but quietly, in the middle of a Tuesday, or a Friday, while someone hums nearby and colors the sky the wrong color because they have decided they prefer it. Lily held up the napkin she'd been working on. "Done," she announced. She turned it around so they could see. 3 figures, roughly oval heads on rectangular bodies, 2 tall, 1 small, all 3 connected by lines that represented hands. "It's us," Lily said. She watched Victoria with those wholly unhidden eyes. Victoria folded the drawing with great care, in half, then in quarters, and placed it in her coat pocket next to her phone and her keys. "It's the best anyone has ever drawn of me," she said. She meant it in more ways than one, and she thought perhaps he heard that. That night, back at her window, she did not pour the whiskey right away. She stood for a long time with the city below her and the napkin drawing on the glass ledge catching the light. And she thought about a man who had given up a dream so carefully and so willingly that he had never once called it a sacrifice, and who spent his evenings drawing the sleeping face of the daughter he was raising alone. Something had shifted. Not loudly, not with announcement. Just a door, somewhere deep and long closed, opening quietly into the dark. She was not ready for what it meant. 3 miles away, Daniel sat at his kitchen table. The apartment was quiet, in the way apartments are quiet after a child has finally gone to sleep, full of the residue of small noises. Toys moved and set down, a cup rinsed in the sink. He opened the sketchbook to a new page. He picked up a pencil. He held it over the blank paper for a long time before he began. He drew from memory. A woman at a diner window turned slightly toward the light, her expression carrying something newly open, something like a question she has only just begun to let herself ask. He worked slowly, with the care he gave to things that mattered. When he was done, he looked at it a moment, then turned to a new page and began again, because some things require more than one attempt before they're true. He did not erase either drawing. He closed the sketchbook and sat alone in his kitchen for a while, listening to the night settle around his apartment. In Lily's room, the carved stars on the headboard caught the faint light from the window. He had made them because she asked. Real ones had been unavailable. He thought about Victoria saying, "I wouldn't mind the company." He thought about the way she had sat with the drawing, very still, for longer than she knew. He thought about what Friday meant to him now and what it had meant 6 weeks ago. Outside, the first light snow of the season had started to fall on Chicago without announcement. It covered the cars and the sidewalks and the small spaces between things with something clean and even and white. The way certain beginnings arrive, quietly, after dark, while no one is looking, transforming everything so gradually that by morning you have almost forgotten what it looked like before. The snow that had fallen quietly on Chicago that first Friday in November did not last. By Saturday morning it had turned to gray slush on the sidewalks, and by Sunday it was gone entirely, leaving behind only the cold and the particular quality of light that comes when winter is preparing itself seriously. Victoria noticed none of this. She was at her desk by 6:30 both mornings, reviewing projections for the first quarter and telling herself, with complete sincerity, that she was not thinking about Daniel Reeves. She was thinking about Daniel Reeves. Not in the way she had thought about men before, the ones she had dated briefly and efficiently over the years, men who were ambitious and attractive and who understood that her schedule came first, men who had eventually stopped calling without her quite noticing. She was thinking about him the way she thought about problems she hadn't yet solved, with the focused attention of someone who knows a thing matters but cannot yet determine exactly why. She thought about the sketchbook, about the 3 drawings of her near the back, rendered with a precision that required looking, really looking, at someone. You could not draw a person's face that way without studying it, without deciding that the face was worth studying. She thought about how he had not apologized for it, how he had only said he should have asked and then stopped when she told him not to, and how in the silence after, he had looked at her with that expression she still couldn't categorize. She thought about all of this while reviewing Q1 projections, and she accepted finally that she was not reviewing Q1 projections. She was sitting at her desk at 7 on a Sunday morning thinking about a carpenter from Evanston who drew stars into headboards and listened to people the way most people had forgotten how to listen. She called no one. She had no one particular to call about this kind of thing. Claire was her assistant, not her friend, though the line had blurred at its edges over 6 years. There was her college roommate Dana in Seattle, but they spoke mostly at birthdays and New Year's, and in the brief warm window after something significant happened to one of them. There was her mother in Scottsdale, who would listen and then suggest that Victoria consider whether she was projecting her loneliness onto an unavailable man, which might be true, but would not be useful. She made coffee and stood at the window. The city below was quiet in the way cities are quiet on Sunday mornings, with a different kind of emptiness than weekday emptiness, chosen and temporary and almost gentle. She thought, I could call him. She did not have his number. She thought, I could find it. She did not look for it. What she did, instead, was open her laptop and search the name of his workshop. He had mentioned it once. Reeves Custom Woodwork, Evanston. And she found it without difficulty. A simple website, clean and spare, with photographs of finished pieces and a brief description that read, handcrafted furniture built to last. Custom orders welcome. Each piece made one at a time. She looked at the photographs for a long time. Tables, chairs, a blanket chest with carved panel doors, a desk with joinery so precise it looked assembled from thought rather than wood. And at the bottom of the page, almost an afterthought, a gallery link. She clicked it. The gallery held 12 images, the furniture she had already seen. But there was one more file at the end, labeled simply, Other Work. She hesitated, then opened it. 8 drawings. Prints, she guessed. Photographs of originals, probably, displayed without title or date. Landscapes, 2 of them, somewhere she didn't recognize. A street scene in winter. A still life with a coffee cup and an open book. And the last one, a pair of hands, resting open on a table, belonging to a person cut out of the frame. The drawing was extraordinary. Not technically, though technically it was more than competent, but in the way it made you feel the weight of those hands, the history in them, the life they had carried. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then she closed the laptop and picked up her phone and dialed her assistant. "Claire," she said when the call connected, "I need you to find me the best furniture gallery in Chicago. Not the biggest, the best." There was a half-second of silence. "For a purchase or for a meeting?" "For a conversation," Victoria said. "Set it up for Tuesday." She hung up and finished her coffee. The city below her had started to wake incrementally the way cities do. She watched it for a while. Then she went back to the Q1 projections and, for the first time all morning, actually read them. The gallery meeting on Tuesday was with a woman named Francesca Dumont, who had run a fine art and furniture gallery on Wabash for 22 years, and who had an eye that took approximately 3 seconds to assess a situation. She assessed Victoria in those 3 seconds and made no judgment visible. Victoria showed her photographs of Daniel's work on her phone, the walnut table, the pieces from the website. She watched Francesca look at them. "Who made these?" Francesca asked. "A carpenter in Evanston. He also draws." Victoria pulled up the gallery page from his website. "These." Francesca looked at the hands drawing for a long time without speaking. "I would like to speak with him," she said. "That may not be straightforward," Victoria said. "He's private." Francesca looked up. "People who make things like this are always private. That's generally not a reason to remain unknown." She handed the phone back. "If you can connect us, I'd be grateful. And so would he, I expect, even if he doesn't know it yet." Victoria drove back to her office in the sleet and did not allow herself to examine too closely what she was doing or why. She was helping. She had resources and connections that other people didn't. She was using them. It was what she did. It had nothing to do with the 3 drawings near the back of a sketchbook. She told herself this with some conviction, all the way up to the 42nd floor. The following Friday, she arrived at the diner with the information about Francesca, written on a note card in her coat pocket, and a feeling she couldn't name sitting low in her chest. Lily was already there, at the table, and she stood up on her chair when Victoria came through the door. "Don't stand on the chair," Daniel said, without looking up from the menu, and Lily sat back down with the precise speed of someone who has been told this before and respects the rule while finding it inconvenient. Victoria sat down. She ordered coffee. She waited for the right moment. It didn't come until Lily had gone to the bathroom and they were briefly, for the first time, alone. "I want to tell you something," Victoria said, "and I want you to hear it before you decide how to respond." Daniel looked at her steadily. He had very still eyes, the kind that didn't skitter or deflect. "All right," he said. She told him about Francesca, about the gallery on Wabash, the 22 years, the reputation. She told him what Francesca had said about the hands drawing. She kept her voice even and factual and did not let it become what it wanted to become, which was a plea. When she finished, Daniel was quiet. He turned his water glass on the table. "You looked up my website," he said. "I did. And you went to a gallery about me." "Yes." He was quiet again, not angry. She didn't think he was angry. Something else. Something more complicated than anger, with more weight to it. "Why?" he said. She held his gaze. "Because those drawings shouldn't be in the back of a sketchbook that nobody sees." The bathroom door opened and Lily came back across the restaurant with the focused momentum of a child who has somewhere to be. Daniel looked down at the table for a moment. Then he looked back up at Victoria, and what was in his expression then was something she would think about for a long time afterward. something between recognition and the particular, careful vulnerability of a person being seen in a way they did not arrange. "I'll think about it," he said. Lily climbed into her chair. "What are we talking about?" she asked. "Art," Victoria said. Lily considered this. "I make art," she said. "I know," Victoria said. "You're very good." Lily accepted this as her due and picked up the menu. Daniel caught Victoria's eye across the table. The look lasted only a second, but in it was something that felt like the beginning of something neither of them had said out loud yet. Something that Victoria thought might require considerably more courage than running a company. Daniel called Francesca Dumont on a Wednesday morning in late November. Standing in his workshop with sawdust on his shirt and his phone in his hand, and the particular expression of someone about to do something that feels like falling. He had thought about it for 11 days. He had told himself it was impractical. He didn't have time. He had 3 custom orders to finish before the holidays. Lily's school play was in 2 weeks and he still needed to find a costume. He had told himself it was probably nothing. That gallery owner spoke enthusiastically to everyone who brought them something interesting and rarely followed through. He had told himself he was content. The woodworking sustained them. He was good at it. Contentment was not a small thing, he had called anyway. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. At the end of it, Francesca had asked to see 12 pieces, furniture and drawings both, for a group show in late January called Material and Memory. She said the show was curated around artists who worked across disciplines. She said his work, based on what she'd seen, was exactly what the show needed. She said this without flattery, the way people say true things. He stood alone in the workshop for a while after he hung up, looking at the grain of a cherry wood panel he'd been sanding. Then he sat down on the workbench and put his head in his hands for a moment, not in distress, in something harder to name, in the specific overwhelm of a door opening quietly in a wall you had decided was solid. He did not call Victoria to tell her. He wasn't sure why. He thought about calling her 3 times over the following week, and did not do it any of those times. He was deeply afraid. Not of the show, or of what it meant professionally. Afraid of what it would mean to owe Victoria something. The thing already growing between them was complicated enough without adding gratitude to its weight. The Friday after the phone call, he told her at the diner. He watched her face while he said it. She listened without moving, with that focused stillness that was one of her most reliable qualities. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good." Just that one word, with something warm in it that she didn't dress up or extend. "Thank you," he said, "for the connection." "You did the hard part," she said. "You called." Lily, who had been carefully peeling the label off her juice bottle in one continuous strip, a project that required total concentration, looked up. "Called who?" she asked. "A woman who wants to show Daddy's drawings in her gallery," Victoria said. Lily processed this. "Like a museum?" "Something like one." Lily looked at her father with the evaluating expression of someone updating a file. "Okay," she said, and went back to the label. Daniel laughed. It was quiet and real, and Victoria felt it in her chest like a small key turning. The weeks before Christmas moved quickly, the way weeks do when you are busy and quietly aware that something is shifting beneath the ordinary surface of things. Daniel worked on the gallery pieces in the evenings after Lily was asleep. He texted Victoria twice, once to say that the hands drawing was in better shape than he'd thought, once to ask, at 11:15 on a Tuesday night, whether she thought a walnut frame or a darker ebony would suit a charcoal drawing better. She stared at this second text for a moment before answering. It was not a professional question. It was the kind of question you ask someone whose opinion you trust. She thought about it seriously and wrote back, "Walnut. Ebony competes. Walnut completes." He responded with, "That's exactly right." And then, after a pause, "How are you awake at 11:15? She typed, "I am always awake at 11:15. Then deleted it and wrote, "Working, same as you." Then sent it. He wrote, "Touché." She set her phone down and looked at the contract she was supposedly reviewing. She was not reviewing the contract. She was reading the word touché and feeling something unfold in her, slow and warm and slightly terrifying, like a fire starting from a very small spark. She did not let herself text again that night. He did not text again either. On the Friday before Christmas, they brought Lily to the diner as always. But this time, Daniel arrived carrying a flat paper package tied with twine, which he set on the table beside the bread basket and did not mention for the first 40 minutes of the meal. Victoria did not ask. She understood by now that he would arrive at things on his own schedule. Lily ate her pasta. Lily talked about the school play, which had been a triumph. She had played a snowflake with, by her own account, considerable stage presence. Daniel confirmed this. Victoria asked about the other snowflakes and was treated to a detailed ranking by performance quality, which she received with complete seriousness. At the end of dinner, Daniel slid the package across the table. "Merry Christmas," he said. He said it simply, no ceremony, the way he did everything. Victoria looked at him, then at the package. She was not, she realized, accustomed to receiving gifts. She was accustomed to giving them, strategically, appropriately, in the correct denominations and categories. Receiving them was different. Receiving them required a kind of openness she had mostly kept locked. She untied the twine and folded back the paper. It was the drawing of her at the window. Not the diner window, and a different window, one she didn't recognize, with city lights visible below. She was turned slightly away from the viewer, one hand resting on the glass. Her expression, in profile, held something she had never seen captured of herself, a kind of longing so precisely observed that it was almost painful to look at. He had seen it. He had seen it and drawn it, and now it was in her hands. On heavy paper, framed in walnut. "Daniel," she said. Her voice was steady. She was good at steady, but this time it cost her something. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "I know." She kept looking at the drawing. "Thank you." Lily leaned over to look at it. "That's you," she said, surprised and pleased as if she hadn't known what was inside. Then, "Daddy worked on it for a long time." "Lily," Daniel said. "What?" "She should know that." Victoria looked up from the drawing. She looked at Daniel across the small table with its paper napkins and mismatched salt and pepper shakers. And what she felt then was the full and complicated truth of something she had been refusing to name for 2 months. She felt it clearly, without qualification or exit route, like standing in a room after a long time in a corridor. She loved him. Not performed love, not useful love, not the managed warmth she had offered the men who had passed through her life before. Something real and inconvenient and completely beyond her management. She loved the ironed flannel shirt and the carved stars and the way he listened and the hands drawing in walnut, and the fact that he had called Francesca on a Wednesday morning in a sawdust-covered shirt. She said none of this. She said, "It's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me." He held her gaze. His eyes were very quiet. In them was something she recognized as a mirror image of what she was feeling. The same weight, the same complexity, the same careful holding of something that hadn't been spoken yet. "Good," he said. Just that. Lily looked between them with the expression of someone watching something she doesn't have words for yet, but intends to understand eventually. Walking home that night through the cold, the drawing under her arm wrapped in its brown paper, Victoria made a decision. She was done waiting to understand what she was ready for. She was done managing this thing from a careful distance. She would tell him. Not tonight, but soon enough. She had no idea what was coming next. Her phone rang at 11:50 that night. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She answered. "Victoria Harmon?" The voice was a man's, controlled, professional. "This is Martin Ellery. I'm a senior partner at Ellery & Crane. I represent the estate of William Harmon." She sat down on the edge of her bed. "My father," she said slowly, "has been dead for 9 years." "Yes," the man said, "and his estate has a matter that involves you. I've been trying to reach you through appropriate channels. But," a pause, "Ms. Harmon, there's something your father left behind that you don't know about." Something we need to discuss in person, as soon as possible. The room was very quiet. What kind of something? She said. Another pause. Longer this time. A child, Martin Ellery said. Your father had a child. Before you were born. A son. And that son has recently filed a claim against the estate that includes... His voice was careful, measured. That includes assets that were transferred to you 8 years ago. Victoria did not speak. Outside the window, Chicago spread itself out in lights and cold and distance. Exactly as it always had. 42 floors below, the street was empty. Ms. Harmon, the voice said. I'll be at your office tomorrow morning, she said. 8 o'clock. She hung up. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long time with her phone in her hands, and the drawing propped against the nightstand and the city outside going on, without any awareness of its own, exactly as it always went on. She had a brother, apparently. One she had never known about. One who was, right now, pursuing a legal claim that could reach into the foundation of everything she had built. She looked at the drawing. The woman at the window looking out at the city lights, holding something she could not quite see yet. She had thought the hard part was admitting what she felt. She had not known until now how naive that was. The office of Ellery and Crane was on the 31st floor of a Michigan Avenue tower, with a view of the lake that on any other morning Victoria might have found beautiful. She sat across from Martin Ellery, silver-haired, precise, clearly uneasy, and listened to what he had to say. His name was Robert Calloway. He was 44 years old. His mother, Patricia Calloway, had worked for Victoria's father's company in the early 1980s and ended the relationship when she discovered he had a wife and an infant daughter. Patricia had raised Robert alone and died 3 years ago. Robert was a retired civil engineer living in Indianapolis. He had not known his father's identity for most of his life. His mother had told him shortly before she died. He doesn't want to harm you, Ellery said carefully. What does he want? Victoria asked. He wants to know his history. Ellery paused. And his attorney has filed a claim on the estate's remaining assets, a property in Door County and a trust account, based on their position that he was an omitted heir under the original will. Victoria thought of the Door County property. A lake house. Small, mostly forgotten. She had not visited it in 6 years. Her father had left it to her along with a modest trust, the bulk of his estate having been liquidated to cover debts by the time he died. She had considered selling the lake house several times and never gotten around to it. What is the trust account value? She asked. Approximately $1.2 million, Ellery said. She nodded. And the property? Appraised last year at $800,000. She sat with this information, $2 million roughly, and a brother she hadn't known existed. I want to meet him, she said. Ellery blinked. Ms. Harmon, I'd advise that any communication go through. I want to meet him, she said again. Before any legal proceedings go further, can you arrange that? A pause. I can convey the request. Do that. She stood. Tell him I'm not his adversary. She stood in the elevator going down and felt the vertigo of a life rearranging itself around new information. She had spent 30 years as an only child. Defined herself against that aloneness. Self-made because she had to be, needing no one because there had never been anyone to need. And now there was a man in Indianapolis who shared her blood and had grown up with the same absence she had grown up with, on the other side of a secret their father had kept from both of them. She thought about Lily saying, "You look lonely." She thought about Daniel listening to her across a diner table with the patience of someone who already understood that people are more than the stories they tell publicly about themselves. She thought, I have to tell him. She was at his workshop door by 4 that afternoon. She had texted, "Are you free?" He had replied in under 2 minutes, "Yes, come by." The workshop was on the ground floor of a converted building in Evanston. Double doors, a hand-painted sign, sawdust and linseed oil in the air before she was through the door. It was warm inside. A half-finished dresser stood on sawhorses in the center. Daniel was at the workbench when she came in, and he turned around and looked at her face and didn't say anything for a moment. "Sit down," he said. Not a question. She sat on a wooden stool near the workbench. She told him everything. The phone call, the meeting with Ellery, Robert Calloway in Indianapolis, the estate claim, the lake house she'd almost sold 6 times. She told him without organizing it into the clean narrative she'd use in a boardroom, because she didn't have the energy for that, and because she recognized this even as she was speaking. She didn't want to perform competence for him. She just wanted to tell someone who would hear it. He listened. He did not interrupt. He did not reach for her hand, or tell her it would be fine, or offer the reflexive comfort that people offer when they want the difficult emotion to end. He let her finish. Then he was quiet for a moment. How are you feeling about it? He asked. I don't know yet, she said. I think I'm still sorting it. Do you want a brother? He asked. The question landed with surprising force. I don't know, she said. I've never had one. I don't know what I want from him yet. A pause. I think I want to find out whether he's someone worth knowing. Daniel nodded slowly. That's a fair place to start. She looked at him, at the sawdust on his shirt and the careful way he was listening, and the workshop behind him with its tools and its wood and half-made things. She had come here because she needed to tell someone, and he was the person she had needed to tell. That fact was neither small nor complicated. It was simply true. Daniel, she said. He looked at her. She had planned a speech, something measured and clear, that acknowledged the difficulty of the situation and the uncertain timing and the multiple ways this could go wrong. She had been composing it since December. I'm in love with you, she said. I've been in love with you for a while. I wanted you to know that. The workshop was quiet. Somewhere outside, a car passed. The wood in the corner smelled of cedar. He looked at her for a long time. His expression did not close or recede. It opened, the way faces open when something that has been held back carefully is finally allowed to show. I know, he said. His voice was low and entirely steady. I'm in love with you too. I've been trying to figure out how to say it for about 2 months. Since the sketchbook, she said. Before the sketchbook, he said. She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. He crossed the workshop and sat down on the stool next to her, close enough that she could have reached for his hand. She did. He held it without any of the performance that holding hands sometimes carries, without significance or ceremony. Just a hand in a hand, the most ordinary and the most extraordinary thing. You should meet Robert, he said after a while. I will. He grew up without a father too, Daniel said. Different situation. But there might be more common ground than you think. She thought about a man in Indianapolis who had found out too late who his father was, the same way she was finding out too late about him. I'll reach out this week, she said. He nodded. He was still holding her hand in the quiet workshop, with the smell of linseed oil and cedar around them. And Lily? She asked. He looked at her. Something in his expression was very gentle. Lily has been calling you her friend since the second Friday, he said. She told her teacher last month that she had a person in her life who was important. When her teacher asked what that meant, she said, It means when they're not there, you notice. He paused. I don't think Lily will need much explaining. Victoria looked down at their joined hands. She thought about a little girl with yellow ribbons and a gap where her tooth had been, pressing against a diner window looking for someone she had already decided to love. She thought about how Lily had walked up to a stranger eating alone and sat down beside her, with the fearless logic of a child who doesn't understand why loneliness is supposed to be private. She thought about everything that had grown from that one small, extraordinary act of welcome. She saved me, Victoria said quietly. That first night, I don't think she knows that. She might, Daniel said. She knows more than she lets on. She gets that from her mother. Victoria nodded. Then she looked at him. Tell me about Maggie, she said. Tell me something real. He was quiet for a moment. Then the quietness shifted into something softer, more willing. She was funny, he said. Funnier than she looked. She had this way of saying the truest thing in a room at the worst possible moment and being completely right. A pause. She would have liked you. How do you know? Because you tell the truth the same way she did, without using it as a weapon. Victoria held that for a moment. Outside the workshop window, the December light was fading early the way it did in Chicago in winter. Not gradually, but in stages, the sky going from pale to pewter to dark while you were still in the middle of something. In 3 weeks, the Francesca Dumont Gallery show would open. Daniel's hands drawing would hang on a white wall in good light, and people who understood such things would stand before it and feel what Victoria had felt looking at it. The weight of a life in 2 open palms. In 1 week, Victoria would sit across from Robert Calloway in a hotel lobby in the Loop and find, within the first 10 minutes, that he had their father's forehead and their father's habit of pressing his thumb against his lower lip when he was thinking. She would not love him right away, but she would recognize him clearly. And recognition, she was beginning to understand, was where everything real began. And tonight, in a small apartment 3 miles away, a 6-year-old with carved stars above her bed would be carefully, industriously drawing a picture on a piece of paper. 3 figures holding hands, standing in front of something large and bright that she would describe, when asked, as their house. When her grandmother called to ask what she wanted for Christmas, Lily would say with complete confidence, "Everything I need, I already have." Her grandmother would laugh, thinking it was a sweet thing children say. Lily would mean it precisely. In the workshop, the December dark came down around them. Victoria did not leave immediately. There was no rush for the first time in a long time. The city could wait. The merger could wait. The legal proceedings and the complicated inheritance of her father's secrets could all wait for 1 more hour while she sat in a warm workshop that smelled of cedar and held the hand of a man who had drawn her face from memory because he thought it was worth remembering. She was 30 years old. She had been on the cover of Chicago Business Magazine twice. She had built something extraordinary from almost nothing, and she had done it believing the price was this: the aloneness, the penthouse quiet, the 47 galas. She had been wrong. What came next was not a reward. It was not something she had earned by suffering sufficiently or achieving at the right scale. It was simply what happened when one small 6-year-old girl with fearless eyes pulled out a chair and said, "You look lonely. Sit with us." Sometimes the most important doors in a life are not the ones you push open yourself. Sometimes they are the ones held open by someone small enough to reach the handle, small enough that you almost missed her. Victoria Harmon had walked through that door on a rainy Thursday in October, without knowing what was on the other side. On the other side had been this: a quiet man, a carved sky full of stars, and the completely ordinary and entirely miraculous possibility of beginning again, of beginning at last, from a place that was not alone.